life will always throw us stuff. So do we have a coping mechanism to deal with what life is throwing us, And even if we, of course, like sometimes when you listen to Eckhart Tolle, which I'm a huge fan of Eckhart Tolle, his work, oftentimes the perception is that people don't lose their temper or they don't get stressed or they don't get this. Of course they do, it's human. You all will lose your temper. You will all get stressed. You will all have insomnia or racing mind. But the key is, do you have a strategy to be able to recover from it quicker? That is really the key. And that's what breathing can offer you. And I also think that breathing can offer you a means that you can cope with situations and it doesn't have the same impact that it would have had before. Yeah. Because I can only think of, I think of myself 20 years ago, and I'm sure you often think of yourselves as well, that when you are in a state of poor sleep quality and faster and harder breathing, it doesn't take much just to push you over the edge. It's like if you're driving a car and if you're in a bad mood. So say, for example, you're driving a car down the road. You're in a bad mood. Some person cuts in front of you. You're going to let that person know. You're going to stick your hand to the horn. You're going to let them know. It's going to make you angry. But if you're driving that car down the road and if you're in a good mood, the person cuts across you, you don't react the same way. The situation is the same, but we have reacted differently based on our mood at that time. So changing breathing patterns, I just think it allows us, life is a bit softer and it allows us to recover quicker. And there's just a tremendous thing anyway, being able to get out of your head. Because our education system, it is training us how to think, but it's not training us how to stop thinking. It's training us how to analyze. And thinking is seen as good. Being able to analyze and reason and decipher and break information into tiny pieces. So the mind is shaped, the brain is shaped into this thinking machine. But thinking is a problem because people can't stop thinking. It's not that people, of course we need to think. We need to think in practical situations. We may need to make decisions, we need to plan, we need to reason. There is a time to think, but there's also a time to stop thinking. But a lot of people are thinking when it's not necessary. And that's why it's often interesting when you're doing a breathing exercise. You do really have to bring your attention out of your mind and onto your breath. And at the start, of course, people are thinking about their breathing. So they're still in the mind, but that's okay. That's where they start, There's my breath coming into the body, there's my breath leaving. So they're still in the thinking mind. But then the thinking mind subsides and then they connect directly to the breath in the absence of thought. And it's a tremendous state to be able to do, is to be able to bring a quietness to the mind. Because only then that you can connect with life. So say, for example, if we're in this room, true as human beings, I know I'm going off a little bit off topic now, but it's an interesting subject. We can communicate with life through our senses, through our sight, through sound, smell, taste, touch. So we have 5 senses. We have more than 5 senses, but the 5 basic senses. But if we're stuck in our head, we're totally isolated from life. Because all of our attention is stuck in our head, and we all have a habit of being stuck in our head, and our education system has totally missed this one. How do you get people out of their heads? And that's why so many people are getting out of their heads by getting hooked on these devices, or television, or gaming, or smoking joints, or drinking alcohol, taking prescription drugs, or taking more hard drugs. Everybody is looking for silence of the mind. Our education system should be there to equip us to be able to bring a silence to the mind. Yes, of course, the mind can be angst, but let's bring a silence to the mind. That's all we're seeking. Because if we have a lot of mind activity, it absolutely affects our happiness. We cannot be happy and have a lot of mind activity. You try living with people with a lot of mind activity. Try working with people with a lot of mind activity, because they're not just polluting their own minds, they're polluting the entire environment around them. So I think we have an onus on ourselves to be able to bring some quietness to the mind, because by doing that, it helps us, but it helps everybody that we're in connection with. And never beat yourself up. Like, it's very, very common, a racing mind. Society has made our minds race, and human beings have been for thousands of years trying to quell this. The whole aspect of religion, spirituality, that was all in a quest to help to bring a silence to the mind. You know, if you look at the Eastern world religions, they are around 2,500 years ago. That was about bringing a silence to the mind, anapanasati, holding your attention to your breath. So yeah, we still haven't figured it out, because if you think of something that is so inherently endemic in the human population having such a massive impact on those individuals, not just in a negative point of view, but it's sabotaging their ability to reach their full potential. Because when your mind is racing, you're so caught in your head, it's going to impact your productivity, it's going to impact your concentration, your attention span, your intuition, your ability to make decisions, your ability to plan, your ability to be productive, your ability to build up relationships. It affects everything. So it's really important that we do take attention out of the mind and onto our breathing. And I think sometimes people feel guilty about it because we have been created to be doers, you know. Again, we have been conditioned that we are productive in society. That's the number one goal of education. Education is not about equipping the individual to be able to cope in life. That's not what it's about. Education is to make us productive people, that we're productive for society, that we work in factories, we work in offices, we go in at 9 to 5, we do what we're told. That's what education is about, and that's the reality of it.
That's why we have human resources departments, because we are a resource.
That's true. Good point. That's a good point, actually. It's since the Victorians, and it hasn't changed that way. Yeah. Oh, for sure, for sure. So this is where I see a massive, and I think it's tremendous to see the movement in breathing, because it gives that people the tools. It's very, very empowering. Like, I would just say it even on a personal basis. If somebody was to say to me, what's the number one thing that it helped in terms of learning breathing exercise, it would have helped my state of mind. Because I didn't have anxiety, I didn't have panic disorder, touch wood, but I was an overthinker, constantly thinking, lost in thought. And I would walk through the streets of Dublin. I went to school in Dublin. Walk through the streets of Dublin, I wouldn't see the streets. You know, I'd go to school every morning, I wouldn't see what was going on around me. How can you see what's going on around you if all of your attention is consumed in thinking? So again, it comes back to the 5 senses. We communicate with life through our senses, through our sight, but seeing in the absence of thought, listening in the absence of thought, feeling in the absence of thought, smelling in the absence of thought, tasting in the absence of thought. I often use the example, if you go to a really good restaurant, so say for example, if it's a Michelin star restaurant or a really good restaurant, and the chef has produced a work of art, and the plate is in front of you. In order for you to really experience that work of art, you need to be able to connect with that in the absence of thinking. You need to be able to see it. Not just see it for the glimpse for a brief second and back into the mind again. You need to be able to smell it. You need to be able to taste it. You need to be able to feel it. And if you can immerse yourself in that food with all of your experiences, then you'll get the best out of that food. You know, you will really appreciate it. But how many people, they go into the restaurant, are so consumed with thought, and by being consumed with thought, it's almost that they're not going to experience the meal in front of them. They will experience it for a few brief moments. They might taste the first mouthful of it and then bump their back in their head, and the next thing is the meal is over and they haven't appreciated the meal. They've just spent €150 and they might as well have been eating a bowl of cornflakes or something. So, you know, and that's just an example. Like, I remember years ago as well, somebody said to me, go down to the beach and just look out into the ocean and it will do you so much good. So I did that. But I went down to the beach, sat on the beach, and I can remember doing it. And I just sat there thinking. Because I couldn't get out of my head. I didn't know how to get out of my head. I got nothing out of it. So here I'm thinking, like, what was that all about? You know, it's a different story when you're in a place of nature and that you're able to look at nature in the absence of thought. And this is what, when people talk about a state of no mind and a state of flow and performance, we achieve our very best when the critical mind is out of the way, because the critical mind is very, very sabotaging. You know, the stuff that goes on in our minds, in all of our minds, it's not just one of us. We're all mad, pretty much, you know. It's just to a lesser or greater extent. Just some of us are a little bit more mad than others. But the human mind, it's the human mind. It's not the personal thing. And this is what, again, that we have been trying to sort throughout our evolution. So like I find a fascination with that because it's really tied in with breathing, because I feel that breathing is the easiest way. It's so much easier to focus in on your breath. And yes, the mind wanders, you bring it back. The mind wanders, you bring it back. But every time you bring your mind back onto your breath, you're helping to train the brain. If you can hold attention on your breathing, you can hold attention on any one thing. You know, we spent 12, 14 years in education, but how many of us were taught how to concentrate? I was not taught how to concentrate. What is concentration? Concentration is your ability to hold your attention on one thing in the absence of thought, not thinking about it, because if you're thinking about it, your attention isn't on it. Your attention is in your thoughts. You can't think about something and have your attention on doing what you're doing. So how do we put the thinking mind aside? That's what takes just a little bit of practice. So go easy on yourselves as well, because it can be a little bit frustrating. And of course, when you start bringing your attention from the mind onto your breath, and then you might tune in with what's going on in your mind as well. And of course, when you start tuning in on what you're thinking about, you tend to amplify those thoughts. But you're bringing them to the surface. But of course, that's a great first step, because now you start to realize, yes, I'm thinking about these thoughts. Somebody did something to me 10 years ago. Dave done it once, and I have been doing it to myself ever since. We all do it, you know. So at least when you're paying attention to the thinking and what's going on in the mind, it gives you a realization that the thinking isn't helpful, the thinking isn't productive, and it kind of spurs you then to do something about it. So then you bring your attention onto your mind, onto your breathing. You hold it there. Yes, the mind wanders off. You bring it back, the mind wanders off. In a little bit of time, you find that, yeah, you can hold your attention on the breath for a little bit longer. But even if you hold your attention on your breathing for 5 seconds, it's still 5 seconds out of the mind. It's still a big plus. So don't say you're here and you want to be there, or you want to achieve 100% success with this. Don't worry about any of that. Start off with 5%. Start off with 5 seconds. Start off with wherever you are. So if you go for a walk during the lunch break, go for a walk in the absence of thoughts. Bring your attention, because the only way to appreciate the scenery around here is actually to experience it. And again, you're going to experience it through your senses. So you might bring your attention into your sight, and you look in the absence of thought. Hearing, you're listening for the birds, you're listening for the leaves, you're listening to the nature around you. Smelling, what's smell, what's taste, what feeling. And from taking your attention onto your breathing then is to take your attention into the body. So as you're sitting there, listen with every cell of your body. So if I go out on stage, my strategy for being able to talk, like in Copenhagen, to talk with 400 people, that can be daunting for some people. I will talk without slides for one full day to 400 people. And I've no plan. The organisers don't know that. But I don't have a plan.
We won't tell him.
I'll tell them anyway. I don't have a structure.
But
I don't.
20 years of experience.
It is. I know, but it's still daunting. You know, you can be doing for.
You used to use slides for this, like.
Sometimes, yeah. I would at a medical conference, but I did last 2 weeks ago. I had slides at a medical conference. I never moved from the first slide for 30 minutes. So then I didn't get through the slides. Because I feel when people are looking at slides, they're hypnotized with the slide. Whereas there's no connection human to human. And that's really what it's about. And the other thing that's interesting about when you go out on stage or to give a presentation, you've no safety net if you've no slides. It kind of spurs you on a little bit. It just puts you into that little bit of a, that small bit of stress which kind of gets you there. It's really, that's the one that pushes you there, So that can be important.